Website button colors, do they really affect conversion rates? Spoiler alert, yes, but also no. In this video, I'm going to show you why the answer isn't as straightforward as you want it to be, and 4 practical tips to help you make the right button color choice for your website to help increase conversions. Hello, I'm Matt Ellis, the MD and founder at Honcho, a web design agency specializing in UI and UX. Over the past 20 years in the industry, I've worked on projects for Google, Oxford University, the UK Space Agency, X Factor winners and losers, and hundreds of other organizations you've never heard of. So, let's jump in. But before we talk about colors, let's be clear about what I mean by buttons, and specifically call to action buttons, or if we're feeling fancy, CTA buttons. A call to action button is usually an interactive element on your website designed to prompt users into taking an action. For example, buy now prompts a user to purchase a product or service. Download offers a downloadable resource like an ebook or an app. Contact us could direct the user to a form or a method to get in touch. The action the user is being called to take is usually something that is income generating for your business. If you spend more than an hour on the internet, you've probably clicked on 1 million of these already. They are literally everywhere. But that wasn't always the case. When the internet began, marketers and designers had to make do with these purple text-based links. Boring. But as the internet and browsers evolved into what we have today, marketers and designers were able to start using something called CSS, aka cascading style sheets, to transform those old boring purple links into big chunky clickable buttons that we're all familiar with today. And it's still one of the primary ways that marketers try to draw our attention to get us to do stuff on websites, not only by utilizing their size and shape and the words within those buttons, but by using their color. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Now, there's been much debate on the interweb over the past many years about what color button converts best. And what I mean by that is which button color makes people click on it the most. Marketers are always looking for psychological advantages to get more sales using methods like FOMO, social proof, authority, and scarcity. So if we can work out what button color converts the best, then we can use that color on our websites and make much more money, right? Well, let's look at some data to find out what it is. CXL published an article in 2021 titled "Which CTA button color converts the best?" Sounds great. It referenced several button color conversion case studies. One case study observed a conversion lift with a red button over green and white options by 5%. A study from HubSpot found that a red button outperformed a green button by 21%, and another study reported an increase in conversions with a red button compared to a green button by a massive 34%. So, folks, we've got a winner. Red buttons convert the best, and green buttons suck. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. But then last week, marketing guru Neil Patel posted this, also called "Which CTA button converts the best?", which clearly shows that blue buttons convert best, and that green converts better than red, almost opposite from the CXL report. But let's dig a little further. In the image description, Neil has added, "This is data from 2,588 A/B tests over 6 years." Nice data. Cheers, Neil.
You're welcome.
And he's also added this, and this is where it starts to get really interesting. What's not shown in the chart is the biggest factor: contrast. For example, if your website heavily uses the color blue, then having a CTA button in blue would just blend in and not produce the expected results. Now, the same thing is mentioned on CXL. The article concludes that there wasn't one button color that converted better. What actually mattered is how the new color stood out in the visual hierarchy compared to the previous button color it was tested against, which makes a ton of sense, because if there was one color that absolutely converted better, then every website would just use the same button color. Internet giants like Amazon, Apple, and Meta have an incredible amount of traffic and data to analyze, and ultimately they all use different colors for their CTA buttons. But what they do have in common, like what CXL and Neil Patel data alludes to, is that their buttons stand out. So How do you make your button stand out? It might sound simple, and it is, but also it's not. Here are 4 practical tips to help you make the right button color choice to help your button stand out and convert better. Before we jump in, if you find any of these tips helpful, just click the link in the description below where you can download a step-by-step guide of everything that I cover in this video today. So, tip 1, start with a contrasting color. One of the best, if not the best way of helping your button stand out is by using a contrasting color to the background the button is placed on. A simple example would be if your background is white, then the most contrasting color you could choose would be black. Every color in the world has an opposite contrasting color, and a super easy way to find out what that is by using a color wheel. You might remember these from school, but what you might not remember is that Sir Isaac Newton invented the color wheel back in 1666, laying the groundwork for modern color theory. His curiosity about light led him to experiment with passing white light through a prism, separating white light into a spectrum of colors. This phenomenon inspired Newton to arrange these colors in a circular format, creating the first color wheel. Thank you, Isaac.
You're welcome.
Here's how to use a color wheel. First, head over to Google. Type in color wheel Figma. Other color wheels are available, but we like this one. Search Google. Click the link. So here we are on the color wheel. First thing you want to do is make sure that complementary is selected. On a color wheel, complementary basically means contrasting or opposite, which is what we're looking for. Then choose the background color of your website on the wheel, and the tool will show you the contrasting color. Magic. If you know the actual hex code of your website's background color, you can type it in here. But if you don't know your background color, but you'd like to, head over to your own website, click View, Developer, Developer Tools, click the arrow, select the background, and there you'll see the hex code. In this case, FF D230. Then pop it in the color picker. Boom. Side note, that's in Google Chrome. You can do it in other browsers too, but I don't know how. You should Google it. This is a great starting point for your button color, but it's not the only thing you need to consider, so make sure you watch to the end of the video for the other important tips. Now, your button color doesn't need to be the exact opposite on the color wheel, but it will give you a good starting point if you have a colored background. However, most websites have white backgrounds. In fact, the top 10 most visited websites in the world all have white backgrounds, and maybe yours does too. If that's the case, then the button color you choose really doesn't matter at all. Yet, more on that later. But what does matter is the contrast ratio. Tip number 2. Setting the contrast ratio. Contrast ratio is a way of describing how much brighter one element is compared to another. In this case, how much brighter your button is than the background that it's on. There's a fantastic tool online to test this called the, wait for it, Contrast Checker. Fantastic name. Head over to Google, type in Contrast Checker, hit search, click the link, and here it is. It's made by the people at Web Accessibility in Mind, or WebAIM for short. They've been working to improve web accessibility since 1999. The tool allows you to enter 2 color values to compare against, a foreground color and a background color. Then, below the 2 color pickers is the contrast ratio score. The contrast ratio score is a calculation between the relative luminance of each color. Luminance is a measurement for how bright a color appears to the human eye. So the contrast ratio score is basically an output of how bright is color A, how bright is color B, and what is the difference between them. The score will always be greater than or equal to 1. A 1-to-1 ratio being no contrast at all, e.g. black on black, and a 21-to-1 ratio being the maximum contrast, e.g. black on white or white on black. The higher the ratio number, the more contrast there is between the 2 colours. If you play with the sliders and colours, you'll see it dramatically shifts the contrast ratio score, and the eager-eyed amongst you will notice that some combinations get a green box around the score. And this is the point where WCAG gets involved. I think I'm saying that correctly.
WCAG or WCAG.
WCAG. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short, are internationally recognized standards created to make web content more accessible to people with disabilities. Their advice is that graphical elements and user interface components, like CTA buttons, should have a minimum contrast ratio score of at least 3:1. Though, as you're trying these different color combinations, you'll notice that the green box doesn't actually appear around the contrast ratio score until 4.5:1. This is because the tool takes into account the ideal contrast ratio for text as well as graphical objects. If you scroll down the page a little further, you'll see where the WCAG green mark pass kicks in for each element. Now, this is something that you absolutely must do when you're choosing a color for your button. Making sure your button and text colors pass the contrast ratio score is a wise marketing decision, but also ethically and morally just the right thing to do. You're not just designing for conversion here, you're designing for inclusivity. It's estimated that around a quarter of the world's population have some form of visual impairment that can affect how they interact with websites. Good contrast ensures readability for everyone, including people with visual impairments or color blindness, and users with age-related visual decline, like myself. Tip number 3. Align button colors with your brand. So, at the same time as having contrasting color and making sure it has the right contrast ratio to your background, the button color also needs to align and harmonize with your brand. But what does that mean? Well, the colors have to be in balance so that there is visual contrast, standing out enough to grab attention, but at the same time has to feel part of the overall brand and visual design so that it looks and feels professional and trustworthy, doesn't look disjointed or awkward, and doesn't look like it's been designed by a 3-year-old. So you could use your primary brand color as the CTA button color, and it'll be, by default, on brand. This can absolutely work, but often the primary brand color is used in multiple places across components in the design, so you can risk the CTA getting lost alongside other elements in the design, despite it having a strong contrast. Just like what Neil Patel said, if your website heavily uses the color blue, then having a CTA button in blue would just blend in and not produce the expected results. Cheers, Neil.
You're welcome.
So instead of using the brand's primary color, it's always good to have a color that works with the primary brand color for your CTAs. If you already have branding guidelines, that can be a great place to start. A good branding guideline document should already include color schemes for the brand that you can use as inspiration for that harmonizing button color. If not, head back to the color wheel, but instead of just looking at contrasting complementary colors, let's explore some other color scheme options. These all require a base starting color as the anchoring point, most likely your primary brand color. So, 2 of the best color schemes to consider for your buttons are: 1. Split complementary colors. This is similar to complementary, but instead of being directly opposite the primary color, it gives you 2 adjacent tertiary colors. Choosing either of these creates a nice balance. It's still vibrant but less intense than a regular complementary color. It's great for making things look exciting without being too bold. Another color scheme to consider would be triadic. A triadic color scheme gives you 3 equally contrasting colors. The 3 points are equally distributed around the color wheel, forming an equilateral triangle, as the name suggests. Triadic colors create vibrant and balanced designs because each color contrasts nicely but doesn't overpower the others. It's a great way to add variety while keeping harmony. By all means, explore the other color scheme options. Monochromatic, that's just a lighter and darker version of your primary color with very little contrast, so don't use those. And analogous colors are groups of 3 colors that sit next to each other on the color wheel. It creates a soft, natural color palette, but again, not great for grabbing attention. Side note, at this point it's worth mentioning another consideration, which is this. Just be mindful of what your competitors' CTA buttons look like. Hopefully your brand and your logo is unique and memorable and can be easily identified in a lineup. That's what great brands do, but remember this: before making a buying decision, your customers will visit your competitors' websites. If your CTA buttons or your entire website looks like your competitors, your brand, your products, your services will be less memorable. Your CTA button is part of your brand. It's such a prominent part of your website, so make sure your button is unique and memorable and helps enhance brand recall. 4th and final tip: use colour psychology. All colours carry meanings. Knowing what they are and how to utilise them can be beneficial. Now, it's a bit more complicated than I want this to be, but I'm going to break this down into the main points. Your first colour psychology consideration is biological responses. Now, as humans, we react to colours. This is something that is deeply rooted in human biology and how we respond to the wavelengths of colour. A colour wavelength is the distance between the peaks of light waves as seen through a tool called a spectrometer. A spectrometer breaks light into different colours, like a prism, and then measures the wavelengths of each colour. Each colour has a different wavelength and speeds at which it travels into your eyes. Now, imagine light is like waves in the ocean. Some waves are big and slow, while others are small and fast. The colour red has the longest and slowest waves, which requires more energy for the brain to process. This triggers the sympathetic nervous system, aka the body's fight or flight mode, causing a boost in adrenaline, which means that the heart rate beats faster and blood pressure can rise. These long and slow red wavelengths can also stimulate appetite, which is why you see so many restaurant brands like McDonald's, KFC, Burger King, etc. use red in their branding. Whereas blue has a shorter, faster wavelength, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system, aka the rest and digest mode, which means that the heart rate slows down, blood pressure drops, and muscles relax. These short, fast blue wavelengths can also reduce appetite, which is why so few restaurants use it in their branding. Each colour via these different wavelengths can influence a different unconscious reaction in your body. And biological responses are typically universal in that most people react to them in the same way. Unlike emotional responses. Closely linked to biological responses are emotional responses. These responses are influenced by personal experiences, culture, and context. For example, as we now know, the colour red gives the biological response of causing a boost in adrenaline. But depending on the context of the situation or the person's personal experience, the emotional response will be different. In one situation, the colour red might enhance someone's romantic feeling with red roses or red love hearts, whereas in another situation, someone's anxiety might increase by seeing a red warning sign or blood. So context of where the colour is really matters, and personal experiences matter too. It's almost impossible to predict what personal experiences and biases have shaped users' positive and negative associations with colour. But you can make some assumptions which may actually conflict with the biological responses. For example, as we know, the biological response to blue is the heart rate drops, blood pressure lowers, muscles relax, which is a great mood to be in to make a purchase. But I'm not sure how well it would go down with Manchester United fans if they changed their CTA buttons to the colour blue, the colour of one of their biggest rivals, Manchester City. And as it happens, there is no blue on the Manchester United website. If colour preference for your visitors isn't as obvious as a sports team, you can lean into things like user research interviews and A/B testing, which I'll touch on a little bit later on this video. Then, on top of biological and emotional responses to colour, we can throw semantic responses into the mix too. Semantic responses to colour are about the meanings or ideas that colour makes you think of. These symbolic meanings are often shaped through your experiences, culture, and things you see every day. They aren't universal, but generally speaking, red is recognised as stop or danger or love. Yellow is associated with caution, attention, and happiness, and green is associated with nature, health, or money. So maybe now you can start to see where this whole colour psychology thing starts to get a bit tricky. For example, if you have a website selling heart rate monitors, a red add to cart button would draw the visitor's attention, potentially giving a biological response of increased adrenaline, which would increase urgency, which is good for sales. But in this context, the visitor's emotional response to the red colour may be influenced by their current health situation if they're ordering a heart rate monitor, and the red may induce anxiety or stress and be compounded by a semantic response, as red represents warning and danger. So context is always key for what you're trying to achieve with colour. Within the colour psychology realm, we need to be mindful of industry-specific colours and that we are aligning with customer expectation. As we've mentioned, colours have meaning and evoke emotions, and brands want to capitalise on those to help galvanise what they're about. For example, like we've mentioned, the restaurant industry like McDonald's, Burger King and KFC all use red because of its attention-grabbing and hunger-stimulating abilities. Tech industry firms like Apple, Google and Meta often use black and white and grey for their products, as those colours evoke a sense of simplicity, innovation and sophistication, all things they want the user to associate with their products. The finance industry, they typically use red or blue, it's like Barclays, JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Fidelity, PayPal, etc., as blue evokes trust, stability and security, which you'd want from a bank, and red because it signals boldness, confidence and leadership, again, good traits for a bank. So there are standard industry colours and assumptions already in place, which it's wise to adhere to. It's unlikely you'd want to use blue or black on a restaurant or a food brand because it's just not what's expected, and you want your colour to help signify and convey what the brand is and does. But saying that, it's really easy to find examples that push against these standards. The Subway restaurant, for example, it doesn't use red at all, and Lloyds Bank isn't red or blue, it's very, very green. Now, the final piece of the colour psychology puzzle for your CTA buttons is cultural differences. This is when a colour in one culture can mean something different in another. For example, in Western cultures, white symbolises purity, peace and weddings. Brides traditionally wear white to represent their innocence. However, in Asian cultures, white represents mourning, death and funerals. White is worn by mourners as a symbol of respect for the deceased. So if your website is targeting a market in a culture or a location you're not familiar with, do some local colour meaning research so you don't make any embarrassing faux pas that would have a negative effect on your business. So all in all, colour psychology can get a bit tricky, messy and honestly weird. There's no real hard, fast rules, and it's super easy to find examples that break the mold, but being aware of it and knowing it well can certainly guide you towards some subtle wins and steer you away from some common mistakes. And even though this video is really just talking about button colours, the colour psychology behind your overall brand is a much bigger topic you should definitely get an understanding of. So now you know how to choose the right colour for your call to action button. Firstly, it's got to contrast with your background colour so that it stands out. That is most important. Number two, it's got to have the right contrast ratio so that everyone can see it and that it meets accessibility standards. It's got to align and harmonise with your brand and be memorable next to your competitors' brands, and you've got to employ some colour psychology so that you're acknowledging your audience's biological, emotional and semantic responses to colour, and you're mindful of colours specific industries use and how cultures interpret colours differently. Don't get too caught up in the colour psychology side of things. It is tricky, and certainly don't prioritise it over contrast. There really is no best button colour, but a button that can be seen clearly will outperform one that is hard to see every day. If you're not doing it already, A/B test your button colours and see what converts better. Run lots of tests. Using tools like Google Analytics or Crazy Egg, it's really easy to validate hypotheses around different button colour choices. If you found this video helpful, hit subscribe for more tips and strategies about how to level up your website, and check out the resources in the description below where you can download a guide to everything I've mentioned in this video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.